Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back after the break to the second session, where we're going to have a slightly deeper look at the finance piece around the green transition. And it's a great pleasure to have with us today Michael Parker, the chairman of the Global Shipping, Logistics and Offshore division of Citi, the major US bank. And Michael is, of course, also the chairman of the Poseidon Principles Association, where he's had 3 terms as chairman since its founding. He was also chairman of the founding committee, of course. If anyone can claim or be burdened with the name of being the architect of the Poseidon Principles, Michael would be that, although I'm sure he would demur and say there were many others involved in helping it along the way. Michael, could we just kick off there? It's now 6 years since the Poseidon Principles were brought to the world at the Hong Kong meeting, annual summit of the Global Maritime Forum, the first one outside Denmark, in fact. What have the Poseidon Principles achieved in those 6 years?
I think what we've achieved is really what the IMO is in the process of doing at the moment, which is being transparent about the impact of finance on the environment. When we set out, under the auspices of the GMF actually, we were lucky that the IMO had introduced the DCS regulation in 2018.
DCS?
DCS being the annual reporting of emissions from each vessel. And so it is a transparency initiative, though I go around the world and a number of people want to blame the Poseidon Principles for various things, thinking we're about compliance. We're not about compliance. That is left up to individual banks to choose how they might use the data and the information they get. So we launched with 11 major banks. We are now 35 international banks and export credit agencies, including 6 Japanese banks. We were 37 in really because 2 banks left the industry, Amsterdam Trade Bank and DZ Bank. And we reckon about 2/3 to 3/4 of all shipping finance. And we are continuing to grow, and we want other shipping lenders who are not signatories to join us, especially those that use the Poseidon Principles in some of their literature and don't pay a subscription. So we would like them to join, and we'll be working on probably some sort of associate membership, rather like the Poseidon Principles for marine insurance have, particularly because the other initiative in finance that started afterwards was the GFANS, the thing before Glasgow in COP26, and it's called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and that is going to become equally important. And in 25, it's going to incorporate capital markets activities. So there are a number of financial institutions, unlike people in this room, that only arrange debt. They don't actually hold it on their balance sheets, or they arrange equity. And that will also be somehow captured in the Environmental Transparency Initiative. So we'll look to expand the membership of the Poseidon Principles in some other form as well as the form we currently have.
When it was first launched, the main members were largely European, Scandinavian, and yourselves at Citi, of course. But now, as you say, a number of Japanese banks have joined. What has their membership brought to the association in terms of scope and reach and impact?
Well, we very much set out to be global, which is one of the reasons that when we were drafting originally, we were not following the process the EU had set out through its taxonomy. And I give full credit to the EU for a lot of the things they did. And the MRV system they had was potentially an option of information we could use, but it's not global. This is a global industry. It is fortunate in having a global regulator, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. And we wanted to make sure that we represent truly the global capital providers to the industry. So the Japanese banks joining us is very, very important. There are a number of other Asian members, and we hope to continue to expand here in Asia.
The 4 principles, assessment, accountability, enforcement, and transparency. Which one of those has proved the most challenging for the association and its tools in use by the individual members?
I don't think any of them have been difficult, because I think when you sign up to such an initiative, you know what you're doing. And what I should say is that as a result of what we did as shipping bankers, the bankers to the steel industry, aluminium and aviation have followed suit with their own initiatives based upon what we did as shipping bankers. We are lucky that we have, through the IMO, an organization that sets rules, if you like, for what are defined as emissions legally, and which will be very important for supply chains globally. I think what we had wrestled with in the first few years is we based our measuring of our alignment against the original IMO ambition of a 50% based on 2008. Once Glasgow had happened and essentially the world moved to alignment with Paris, then the challenge is, well, how do you do that? And so before the IMO came out with its revised ambition in last July, we were struggling a little bit with, how would we adopt 1.5? And we had some fairly vigorous debate around that. We decided to postpone any decision until the IMO MEPC 80 had made its decision. And the fact that it made such an ambitious decision, which is now putting into practice, essentially solved that problem for us. And I think for the shipping industry, provided the IMO does execute against the plan that was outlined at the beginning of this morning, then the pathway for all of things associated with shipping is set. Clearly there's the technological development to make it happen and the reduction of all the emissions. But then if the regulator has set the pathway to decarbonization for the industry, in the expectation that in 2028 they would be likely to align fully with Paris, then it's difficult to see what other trajectories people can come up with. There are a lot of trajectories out there, but if the regulator said this is how we will decarbonize shipping, that's how everyone will measure themselves against it. And that's where the regulators, investors, everyone using the data that comes out of that will essentially be measuring themselves as to how well they're doing against that ultimately 1.5% Paris-aligned trajectory.
I mentioned in my opening remarks that you need to expect the unexpected in this era of disruption. One of the unexpected issues was the pandemic lockdowns, and particularly for the cruise business, the fact that the industry was laid up, the ships were laid up, and that impact on the measurements, the CII measurements for the cruise ships, which actually then impacted the measurements of the loan books of the members of the Poseidon principles. Is there any scope for adjustment of those CII rules in the offing?
And I remember you in one of your headlines pointing out that Citi as the chair and Paul Taylor, Soc Gen as the vice chair, that we'd missed our targets massively as a result. One of the issues is the cruise industry has never really engaged with the IMO on this issue, clearly on SOLAS and those sort of issues, of course it has. And it was clearly perverse that an industry that was essentially in layup suddenly had twice the carbon intensity of the year before, yet it had 50% of the emissions. And this highlighted the fact that there was something wrong with the way the cruise sector, passenger shipping in general, but particularly the cruise sector, was measured. We took a step to separate the reporting of our alignment against cargo and passenger shipping, as well as having an overall alignment, because we wanted to make it clear that there was something wrong and that our results shouldn't be misinterpreted. Now, proposals were made ahead of MEPC 80, 79 and 80 by the cruise sector, which got no support. I believe a proposal was made at the last MEPC that finished 2 weeks ago, which may well get more support and may well be one of the revisions to CII that gets approved next April for the final review in December next year, which is a very positive sign. So to the extent to which the true emissions from the cruise sector are being measured for the business they do, rather than being measured on the same basis as a container ship or a cargo ship. I think that's a positive message. So it's about the flexibility and the reality that I think the IMO technicians and decision makers are taking, that they're recognizing there are some exceptions to the rules and they need to be sympathetic to those, provided those proposals are also realistic.
I think many people were surprised at the forward-leaning approach of the Poseidon Principles and the members to try and show public benchmarks of how banks with shipping portfolios were going to be measured and publicly seen to be measured against the likely trajectory to hit that end target. But in that, there is, of course, the explicit criticism that actually it's missing the point. That really the point in and around green finance is about financing zero emission industry in the round. Steel, other manufacturing, as well as shipping, of course. How do you address that criticism that while measures such as the Poseidon Principles as a guide are worthwhile, actually the key thing is about the finance for a truly green transition?
Well, I don't think there's any conflict. I think there are two separate issues. The shipping industry in the last few years has reduced its emissions very significantly, mainly through operational measures and through some technical measures, clearly. The goal between now and 2030 is to reduce emissions, and the Poseidon Principles enables us to measure in our portfolios how effective the clients we lend to are doing that. And so that is an important part of the progress. We don't go from here to here overnight. We have to address the issue of there are very few what are called pure green assets to finance at the moment. And whilst there's quite a lot of retrofitting going on, we really need to see these dual fuel vessels hit the water. We need to see what would be defined in I think shipping will be deemed to be blue rather than green when it comes to finance. We need that. Now the good thing is, because of the strong shipping markets, ship owners are building up a lot of capital themselves. It's frustrating for banks to be prepaid, but it's a healthy sign of the industry. So I look at it very positively. When these assets become available to finance, the health of the shipping industry financially will be strong. The banks that are lenders to the shipping industry will have that capacity. And therefore, we will correct that. It's not a dislocation, it's a timing issue. It's simply a timing issue. And because of the importance of Scope 3 to every other industry in terms of supply chains, the true impact of what the IMO is doing and what lenders to the shipping industry are doing will be seen to be very, very important in about 2 to 3 years. When the IMO is finished defining the rules, and they become the rules, if you like, for everyone who has any maritime supply chain, then the power of that will really become very clear.
Two final questions before we wrap up, Michael. The first one is around the what's being termed green hushing. The pressure, particularly the political pressure, largely social pressure, particularly in the US, for institutions to turn a blind eye effectively to all matters ESG and particularly the green transition. Do you see the impact of that in ship finance, and how are you managing that?
No, I don't really. I think again, it's this distinction between transparency and compliance, and understanding that the Poseidon Principles is about transparency, not compliance. There are concerns, particularly in the US, around a sense of forcing people to do things they don't want to do. But again, I'm sorry to repeat this, people need to understand how powerful the IMO is, not just for the shipping industry, but for every other industry, and that it will define the emissions, the Scope 3 emissions of every other industry that moves anything by sea. And it's that transparency and the data that is required to comply with the IMO regulations. We're using that data. One of the things that you see it argued in your pages, in Lloyd's List and other, all that data should be in the public domain. Currently, it is confidential on the IMO database. Legally, it belongs to the ship owner. we need every ship owner to publicize that data. We need the IMO to pass a 2/3 resolution in its General Assembly to make its database public. But it's pretty public already through the initiatives of Poseidon Principles, the Sea Cargo Charter, what the PPMI for insurance is doing. So I think it's that transparency and the data we are using that gives the lie to any suggestions of greenwashing or green hushing. Now, a few years ago, including in this country, there were a number of bond issues, including to finance scrubbers that were deemed to be green. Well, those were early days when people didn't quite understand what green was. The standards in the sustainable bond market of what is or isn't green are now very well established. The definitions of what would be green, but it will probably be called blue for the maritime sector, have been established. So I think within sort of the 2 years, which is very conveniently aligned to the processes in the IMO, there will be absolute clarity about it. So greenwashing and green hushing in the context of shipping, I think, is really unfair and unlikely.
A final comment, if I could, about the Global Maritime Forum. The Global Maritime Forum is a not-for-profit sustainability organisation that grew out of the Danish Maritime Forum, around 10 years old now. This week sees its annual summit here in Japan for the first time. What do you hope it achieves, and what does it say about the Japanese shipping cluster and what it can offer the wider world, as we were discussing a little earlier with the earlier panel?
Well, I think it's Global Maritime Forum has been extraordinarily successful.
I should say, by the way, I think the Poseidon Principles is probably the standout achievement of the GMF so far.
Well, that's kind of you, but there have been others. But I think what's very important is through not just the GMF, through the Getting to Zero Coalition, we first met in the Getting to Zero Coalition in Copenhagen, having made sure no Italians turned up because COVID came upon us. But because we'd had that first meeting, we then met on Zoom as groups of people who would never normally be at the same conference. So the fuel producers, the manufacturers, the engine producers. And I think we advanced decarbonisation by 5 years. It's one of the few upsides of COVID that we actually moved this agenda forward. Now the GMF, I think, through the GTZ and other initiatives, played a big part in what the industry was deemed to be successful in doing, which was persuading the IMO that industry is keen to get on and decarbonise. And so I think the call to action ahead of the Glasgow COP was important, and the fact that the GMF represents the whole value chain is a crucial thing. We represent the maritime supply chain, not just ship owners. It's the energy sector that is producing the fuels for shipping as well as the ships. So if decarbonisation is the big issue, if the IMO completes its work, you could argue that the path is set, that in a way that issue is not behind us, but there's a pathway that everyone can get around, technology will develop, but essentially the world has agreed to move forward in a particular way. What are the other big issues facing the maritime sector? It's the seafarer. I think that is probably the issue. Seafarers were not treated as essential workers during COVID. It was a disgrace. We're told by the health industry there'll be another pandemic along soon. We've got to address this issue of treatment of seafarers, the shortage of seafarers, and the fact that this industry is going to become technologically much more complicated. And so we're going to have a very different standard of seafarer. So I think that's one of the issues that will come out of the discussions in the GMF. In the context of the Poseidon Principles, we've established a couple of working groups, one to review our governance after being in existence for 5 years. The other is what we've called the Future Principles Committee, which is to look at those issues which could be around seafarers, biodiversity, could be all sorts of things, scrapping obviously, where what we did in the first place with the Poseidon Principles was collaborate with our clients. It was a joint effort of bankers and some external advisors and ship owners. What are the future issues where finance, through being able to measure things, can help ship owners do those things that are going to be required of them in future around operational standards, environmental impact, and those things. So we want to look forward in the GMF around those issues, and we want to look forward in the Poseidon Principles. But again, it's about being collaborative and helping people make the changes that we need to make.
Michael Parker, thank you very much for your time this morning and those very informative comments. Thank you indeed. Pleasure. If you'd like to show your pleasure. Now, could I invite the speakers to our finance panel to the stage, please? Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. Sorry. Anywhere? Yeah, please, anywhere, Paul. Hello. Thank you, gentlemen. Excuse me, I just need to get myself wired up. Several of our speakers will be, two of our speakers will be speaking in Japanese. So you will need, if you don't speak Japanese, you'll need your little headsets, as I do, I'm afraid. Forgive that delay there. Thank you, and may I first welcome the panelists here this morning. First of all, to my left, Paul Taylor, the Managing Director and Global Head of Maritime Industries at Societe Generale, the French bank. Masahiko Azagami, Head of Ship Finance Team in the Development Bank of Japan. Matthew Forrest, the Managing Director and Co-Head Transportation Capital Markets in the APAC region for BNP Paribas, and at the far end, Nobuo Takahashi, the Deputy General Manager of Specialty Finance Division and Head of Ship Finance at SBI Shinsei Bank. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us this morning. Let's just start on that issue of the Poseidon principles and particularly its impact here in Japan. Michael Parker was saying that it has had impact, the 6 banks that have joined. Masahito Azagami from DBJ, first of all, why did the DBJ join the Poseidon Principles Association, and how is it helping you, guiding you to meet your decarbonisation priorities?
Okay. From now on, please.
Absolutely.
Yes, our bank, the Development Bank of Japan, is 100% subsidized by Japanese government. So we have our company policy to design the future in the finance areas and resolve social issues. So taking into consideration, we have to consider a decarbonization and find out the items to resolve this. And in 2021, Poseidon principles, we participated in this, and since last year we have a steering committee, and we participate as a member of the steering committee. So the realization of a society is the big objective that we have, and this is the first priority objective that we have, and we would like to cooperate as much as possible to materialize this. And our objective, yes, 2050 and carbon neutral is our big target we have. But just talking about the current situation, so Poseidon portfolio and alignment score is available in the principle, the 2050, the carbon trajectory. To what extent there is a difference at this moment, and this is the index to show the difference. But at this moment, we're not proceeding well, and the minimum. Compared with the minimum, and it's plus 30.2%, it's striving 35% plus at this moment. So at this moment, there is the big difference there still. However, the Poseidon principles, in order to calculate this figure, the stock base, or we're looking at the exposure and we're calculating based on the exposure, so it won't radically improve in 1 year. However, whatever that we can do, yes, we are striving hard to, proceed to near the trajectory that we have, and have to be able to understand quantitatively to what extent we have been able to improve, and we're approaching the trajectory that we've set.
Bank to finance greener ships.
そうですね。それはあると思います。
Yes, I think so. Yes. No, we haven't been taking the statistics. It's just a feeling that I have personally. But thinking about the latest, the infinite fuel areas, I think it has become quite active recently. And the Poseidon principal banks or climate alliance scores have been taken into account, and they're positive about tackling these areas. And at this moment, the competition is getting severe. But looking at the ship owners, the green ships owners, when they are thinking about maintaining, they have to think about the competitive areas, and they should be able to obtain capital, considering finance in a good way. So I think they are trying to improve the conditions to actually push forward the building of ships. So I think that has been effectively utilizing the Poseidon principles well.
Takahashi at SBI Shinsei Bank, and put to you just the same simple question. What value has being a member of the Poseidon Principles Association brought to you as a bank, and how is it driving and incentivizing change?
Yes, the SBI Bank as well. Yes, we have the interim plan, and one of the objectives is the sustainability realization through the business. And we have a ship KPI. We haven't specified, but in 2021, yes, in the relatively early time in Asia, and amongst the institutions, yes, the Poseidon principles, yes, we are agreeing to this principle, and even utilizing this as sustainable finance have been developed, and we have been also participating in the developments. Poseidon principles, the reason we come to participate is because we have European clients, and we actually listen to those voices, and we also listen to voices, including the disclosure information. It's been expanding amongst the Asian clients as well. The reason we participated in this is the centering on the European countries. We have the latest information and being proceeding with these movements, and the Japanese or Asian banks should not be delayed in the advancement, and we have to access the latest information and look at the global latest ship finance. We have to understand how the situation is and how it's been tackled. And I think it's important to be able to access, so I think it's a quite important tool to be able to utilize that. And another point is from clients, and the emission data from clients. Yes, we have been receiving the useful information, and without keeping that waste, we have to consider the sustainable strategy, and we should be able to understand quantitatively and be able to have effective dialogues. And that's why it's been expanding in Japan as well, and we have to consider establishing the market effectively as a member. We hope we'll be able to contribute further in the future.
Boris, the co-head of transportation capital markets in the APAC region for BNP Paribas. BNP Paribas is widely acknowledged as having the world's biggest shipping loan book these days. Matthew, how are the Poseidon principles, the use of the Poseidon principles, guiding and influencing your approach to the market and the terms that you're able to offer clients?
Obviously, we take it very seriously. It takes a lot of time, not just reporting, but management time discussing this topic. So far, we don't have any origination guidelines in terms of what type of ship we can or cannot finance. But we are, of course, very keen to be financing the newest and best ships available in terms of energy efficiency. And I think very much focused on trying to finance the new technology ships when they become available. I think the problem for us is that they're not becoming available fast enough. So I think really the rate determining step in this energy transition is probably not going to be the financing, because I think, as previous people have said, ship owners have built up quite considerable balance sheets. The banks are willing to finance these vessels when they come available, but we're just not seeing enough of these ships available to finance.
Do you feel the focus, as I was asking Michael Parker just now, the focus on managing the existing fleet is too much of a distraction from the needs ultimately to be financing the new fleet, the new green fleet, which will be needed for 2050?
I think there's still a role for current technology ships, especially for smaller sizes that tramp all around the world. And obviously we've seen the decarbonisation being led by probably container shipping, large liners which have fixed routes where they know that the availability of the alternative fuel is going to be there. But for the smaller size ships that tramp all around the world, I think the real issue is the availability of the fuel in all of the ports that they're going to be going to. So we still see a role for conventional fueled vessels, and I think when you look at modern eco-design ships, they're already much more efficient than the same type of ship that we would have been financing, say, 10 years ago. And then we also look to see that owners are using other kinds of energy-saving devices on those ships. So that might be different designs of propellers, new technology paint, this bubble technology for reducing resistance, shaft generators, wind power, all these other sort of things that can come to play, which I think means that there will still be a role for conventional fueled ships for some time to come, especially in the smaller sizes.
Thank you. Could I come to Paul Taylor from Societe Generale, and one of the key players in the Poseidon Principles alongside Michael and one or two others, and the Deputy Chairman, I believe, at present as well. Just on the Poseidon Principles process, to wrap that up, Paul, if I could, what are for you the key next steps, the next challenges that the association faces in ensuring it has traction and efficacy with the clients of the banks and driving the decarbonisation agenda?
Yeah.
Helping drive.
Thank you, Julian. I mean, clearly, I think the Poseidon Principles is doing well where it is today, but it needs to keep developing. And we have to be aware that, as Michael said, it's a transparency initiative, but it has gone a little bit further than that for many banks, because again, as Michael mentioned, he mentioned the Net Zero Banking Alliance, where there's wider climate targets that banks have set at the sort of top level. Including shipping, but other businesses as well. So what we have to do in the Poseidon Principles is make sure that we remain relevant, because we have to be aligned with these wider climate targets, because these are the ones that are going to drive capital availability in shipping from banks going forwards. If we're not aligned down the line, none of us are aligned, or very few of us are aligned today. That's for sure. But unless we work on our alignment of our portfolios, that capital may well shrink going forward. So, we have to work very closely with our clients for sure, and remain relevant with them. But we have to make sure that as the Poseidon Principles develops over time, and including other things other than decarbonisation, but on decarbonisation, we align the Poseidon Principles with other wider initiatives which the banks are looking at and which are going to drive our whole targeting.
Could I move the conversation on a little to talk about the financing of ships in the here and now? So that's both very green ships and, of course, conventional ships. Half the ships ordered this year conventional fuel and how that fits in with managing portfolios that will be reducing over time. Paul, could I put it to you directly? I mean, are you comfortable financing conventionally fueled ships today as part of a broader portfolio? And then how does that fit in with bringing your alignment down over time?
Sure. Well, the answer to the first question is yes, we are. I mean, 70% of the order book is still conventional fuel, or 60% by tonnage. So I think it's way too early to say that as a financier in the industry that we're not going to finance conventional fuel vessels. But the reality is, it's all about lending behaviour, which is going to drive our own alignment of our portfolio. And that means two things. It means financing more alternative fueled vessels when they're available. And those alternative fuel vessels have to be fueled, of course, on those alternative fuels as well. And we have to work with our clients on that, and it's all about working with our clients, those clients who have a commitment to net zero, a commitment to the energy transition. So it's not just about whether we're doing conventional fuel vessels, whether we're doing alternative fuel vessels. It's about working with the client, making sure they've got a commitment to net zero, making sure that they have already invested in the energy transition to some extent, making sure they've got a sustainability report, and looking at the tailpipe emissions. So it's working with the right clients, and whether it's a conventional fuel vessel or it's not is sort of irrelevant to us today, because it's about working with our clients who are the best clients in the industry.
Is relationship banking in that sense alive and kicking in ship finance today?
Well, I don't know what sense you mean, but I think relationship with our clients is more key than ever.
Yep.
And we have to understand their strategy, and they have to comprehend also that banks, we all have our strategies as well, which is to allocate capital to the greenest clients and the greenest assets going forward.
Thank you. Could I turn to Mashima Azagami of the Development Bank of Japan? What is your approach to conventional fueled ships, and how are you working that into being able to improve, hopefully, your trajectory in the longer term?
そうですね。我々も
Yes. Yes, we have been doing, we have been continuing with the investment in the conventional ship, as well as Taylor-san mentioned at this moment. Yes, so for the ones that's been ordered at this moment, most of the vessels or the ships are conventional fuels. So, and we would like to, yes, meet the requirements of customer. And so we are, yes, continuing with the financing of conventional ship in order to improve the climate change issues. Of course, it might be good, to stop the financing for the used ships and to, yes, invest in the new ones. But at this moment, the new fuel availability or accessibility, taking into consideration these areas, I don't think it won't be the solution to decarbonize this industry. So at the same time, the conventional fuel ships, for example, energy-saving devices could be introduced, and also the furnace can be optimized. And so these measures could be the first steps that we can take to decarbonize the situation. The retrofit items or from the financial institutions, yes, we are researching to what extent we'll be able to actually contribute to this area. And so even from the financial institutions, we would like to support as much as possible from this area. それでは少し高橋さんの方にお伺いしたいというふうに思っておりますけれども、ここチーフエグゼクティブ早期規制を 方もおっしゃった、なんかこう他社の状況も見てみますというような話がありましたね。見守っていきますということで、そして、ビジネスケースがそこまではっきり提示されておられなかったように思うんですけれども、小さなオーナーで、この、難しいその状況にあるところですね、どういった判断をされるべきが、短期的投資ということで、あるいはそこまで使われないかもしれないというところへの投資ということはどういうふうにお考えになりますか？Yes, in Asia, yes, looking at the Japanese market, yes, we have large companies and operators and also small scale companies. Yes, we would like to keep a good relationship, and also the finance relationship also would be important. And I think these are the factors that raised the development of this industry in Japan. And looking at the explanation and situation, and if there is the financial difficulty in making further investment or to invest in the development of new vessels, yes, we've been hearing that frequently that it might be difficult to invest in it. Looking at the clients, the big clients that may be able to invest first, I think it's going to be legitimate to consider that seeing those who will be able to invest first could do, and not only limited to Japanese clients. Yes, I think many companies that require investment, the sustainable link loan, this is a sustainable related loans that's possible to utilize, and I think other than the large-scale companies that could be able to utilize these incentives could be utilized by medium or small size, medium size. You don't have to wait and see. We need to generate an environment where we'll be able to establish an environment where these companies can also utilize the financing from institutions, financial institutions.
Move on and talk a little about the state of the finance market at present. As I mentioned earlier, the profits that shipping has been making in the round in the last 3 to 4 years has been so much that debts have been paid down, debts have been paid off early and refinanced. That has left banks searching for good quality owners to lend to. That's reduced loan margins to some extent, put pressure on covenant issues and terms. Then you of course have the rise of the Chinese leases and even private finance coming in to offer new sources of finance to owners. What's your perspective here in Asia about the competitive landscape for banks such as yourself, and are you comfortable with the market and the rates that are currently being offered?
Well, we have an interesting problem that our clients have got too much money for one. They keep repaying us.
Did you see that one coming? Talk about
they keep repaying us when we don't want to be repaid. I mean, we want to be repaid, but over time, as per the agreement. So we've seen our portfolio in Asia come down quite significantly over the last 18 months because of, excuse me, a lot of prepayments. Either because the owners have been taking advantage of high asset prices to sell ships, or they just have a lot of free cash available, and it's one of their best ways to use it is to reduce some of the debt. So it's a problem, as you say, for us. We need to try and replenish our portfolio. We have to run quite fast just to stand still. Not that we're particularly looking to grow our portfolio, I think, but we'd like to, I think, maintain it around the current levels or get back to where we were. But it is a very competitive environment. We see, like you say, competition from all different sectors, but primarily I think Chinese leasing companies lately have been very competitive.
I read that the terms that the Chinese leases
The terms, not just the pricing, but the overall terms. So the loan to value can be substantially higher.
Yeah.
The pricing might not be cheaper, but I think the IRR might be more attractive if you look at it in the round. If you have a higher advance ratio, which not all owners are looking for, by the way. We have some owners which are very happy to finance at much more conservative advance ratios. So we do find pockets of business that we can do with our client base. We have a very big client base. Obviously, we've been in this business for a long time, but we are feeling the effects of competition. Probably not from a non-bank type financing. That's not really the market that we're in. I think they're probably fishing in a different pond to us. But certainly the Chinese leasing companies. But we have a very interesting relationship with the leasing companies because we're competing with them on one hand, but they're our clients as well. So oftentimes we might lose a transaction to a leasing company, but we might end up financing that leasing company in the background. So it's a bit of a interesting relationship we have with those leasing companies.
Paul, could I put the same to you? And mentioning Mr. Kawagami again from Soki is the sort of emblematic sort of smaller owner. Surely it's a great time for them to be trying to borrow money to invest in these new ships, isn't it?
Well, it is, and there are banks out there. There's huge liquidity in the market at the moment, so I think it's a great time to be looking for banks to lend money, because the banks' portfolios, as Matthew said, are being repaid at an alarming rate. But just to be totally frank, every bank in the market has a slightly different strategy, and it's
how are you approaching it?
Well, I'll come on to that in a second, but I think it is a difficult time for some of these smaller owners with the increased uncertainty that everybody is facing in the market in terms of technology risk, the alternative fuels. Banks are quite careful in where they lend their money, and they are favouring the larger ship owners to a certain extent. So I empathise with the smaller ship owner. The way we're approaching it, we have the same issue again of prepayments on our portfolio. Of course, everyone has regulatory pressure. So I think if we just rely on lending for our business, it's going to be a tough ride going forwards. It's particularly competitive in Asia. It always is, even more particularly in Japan. So the way we're approaching it, we do tend to focus on the larger ship owner, to be totally honest with you. But we also have to stay relevant. And there's never been a better time than being innovative as a bank to match the innovation of our ship owners as clients. And what does that mean? It means coming up with innovative products, lending products, in whether it's a sustainability loan or whatever, but it's very important, or a fund to retrofit vessels. But it also means more advisory and getting closer to one's clients. And you can do that through advisory, helping one's clients move into new segments of the market, bringing partners for new projects, and that is helping us remain relevant in a really, really tough market, I think, for banks today.
Azagami-san, could I ask you the same question? How are you dealing with this very competitive market landscape?
Yeah, そうですね。
Yes. This is a very fierce market, a competitive market. And talking about the smaller owners, let me introduce the one product of the sustainable loan. We have a zero emission accelerating finance with the SK, and that is the program jointly planned. And for each vessels, it is ranked like a S or A, and then that will give the financing. And this type of the sustainable financings that would be limited probably onto those human resource intensive operators, but this is only looking at the evaluations of the vessels. So the smaller owners can apply for this the evaluations and the program as well.
Nobu Takahashi, margins are being squeezed, terms are being pushed down, clients are difficult to attract. How are you managing this very competitive market landscape?
Well, like Azegami-san has said, everybody is trying to achieve a zero emission. And so the target of financing that would be probably going towards the very advanced type of the vessels. And in Asia, some of the smaller entities probably wait and see approaches, but others, of course, they would use the oil, but the high efficient vessels that would be ordered. And so it is not just one step towards a zero emission, and that they would take several steps in between. And for those clients to be able to achieve the zero emissions, eventually the policies and also the their plans would be listened carefully, and based on the scenarios which is appreciated, then they will be able to give the financing to those companies. So it is not just the one step towards the zero emission, but there is also the refinancing for the conventional type of the loans. So they be having mixed approaches.
Thank you. A final question, quick question to you all. It's very easy in these discussions to talk as if financing new zero-emission ships for new kinds of cargoes is a panacea, an easy solution. Clearly, there are new risks in financing those ships. Will the trades grow? Will the technology work? How will technology evolve from the first generation? The old saw that in shipping, with technology, there's always the race to be second, because being first is never particularly good. Could I ask very briefly how you are managing the risk of new technologies and these new markets? Could I turn to you first, Masahiko, please?
Well, about the risks, especially for those dual fuel vessels, the technologies challenges are high, and also the cost is quite high, and there's no track record so far. So in evaluating the premium for the new type of the fuel vessels are quite difficult, and that is a difficult area for our balancing. So with the new fuel premium, which should be also appreciated as their values, that is the difficult part. And also in terms of the technologies, what kind of the alternative fuels will become the major ones? That is another area of the difficult area. It could be a duals, the alternative, and we don't know whether which ones should be chosen. So they are not betting only one. They are still having some diversified approach. That is a kind of the hedge taking, risk hedging, and in actualities, the solution for the decarbonizations should be sought after with the discussions with our clients. And one of them is the energy saving device, the retrofitting, and also the navigation route optimization technologies. And not only just giving money through the lending, we would like to become a kind of the advisors or the party to be consulted with.
Similar to Paul's approach around the added value that you can bring. Nobu Takahashi, SBI Shinsei, how are you managing the risk of new fuels and new trades?
As for the risks perspective, it could sound very cold, but we are senior lenders. So once they are successful, the merit is very difficult to be taken as the fruit. Of course, we are going to support the client, and it is rather difficult for the lenders to take aggressive approach from the beginning, especially in the conglomerate of the maritime operations. There are the different stakeholders, and we are in the transition period. And who is going to take what kind of the risk, and which ones will be shared? And then the private and public involvements are also necessary, and based on the subsidies of the government necessary. And of course, the green strategy in Japan underwent the various development the project, and also the METI has also they given a lot of the expectations in terms of the support, and the GS Economic the Council has also mentioned the hydrogens and also the ammonium type of the supply chains was included within the scope of the investment, and that we need the such kind of the involvement from all the parties.
Thank you. Matthew, have there been any unexpected risks emerging on your part when you've looked at these emerging fuels? And
no, I don't think so. I mean, I think we were quite early to adopt the financing of LNG as an alternative fuel. We're now starting to do methanol, but of course all of these ships are dual fuel, so the fallback is always that they can use conventional fuel. I think probably the technology risk is not the biggest risk. The risk is whether the fuel is available in the quantities that's required. I think yeah, generally the technology risk is not a big issue, and we tend to work with the large owners that have a very strong risk culture, very professional in their ship management. So a lot of these risks will have to be managed by the ship owner. I guess for us it's a financial risk because these assets cost more than conventional ships of similar size. And there we have to be careful how we structure transactions and you know, be careful with who we're dealing with. But like, I think we're dealing with the biggest and the best ship owners in the world, so I think they have the resources and the capabilities to manage these risks.
There is an increasing tiering of the freight markets, of course, and although some areas seem to be refusing to acknowledge that, so there is perhaps some measure of payback. Paul, are you equally relatively relaxed about potential risks of this transition phase?
We're aware of the risks, but and apologies for repeating myself, but if we look at it on the client side, as long as the relationship's good with the clients, the top ship owners, they've got a very transparent and coherent strategy and policy towards the energy transition, and they have strong credit. For some of the markets we're looking at, we may need a longer-term charter as well. But as long as some or all of those are in place, we're pretty relaxed. And then on our own side, just to add a bit of a different perspective, I think it's really important now that we're all experts in these new fuels and the energy transition, and not just have one or two experts in the team. We have to invest in the right talent, bring in different types of people with different expertises now, because it has all changed a little bit. We're not financing a necessarily just a conventional fueled vessel and looking at loan to value and freight rates. We're looking at different risks, and we have to understand all those risks. And also, if we're going to be on the advisory side, really understand those markets in quite a lot of depth. So we are spending a lot of time, yes, we've got the client side, but on our own side, spending a lot of time increasing our own education, from myself across all the team, through to bringing in new talent.
Which is the expression of that complexity.
Absolutely.
Being one of those added challenges.
Yeah.
Indeed. Gentlemen, many thanks for the insights you brought this morning. I trust the audience has appreciated it. Please, if you'd like to show your appreciation again, thank you very much. And we'll convene again in just about 15 minutes. If I could ask you to be quick for a quick coffee for the final 2 sessions, and then there's a networking lunch just next door. Thank you.
Great, lovely.